that there is there's also a much more protection of the individual's rights, corporate rights, but less of, and to the omission of, collective rights. And so when we think about our rights as people today, we are made up of those various things as individuals, but we're also part of a very wide collective. And so when it comes to ethics, and I've been working with research and also working with the Mi'kmaq Ethics Watch, we are constantly aware of the importance of the kind of protocols for doing research in our community and the importance of the kind of consent considerations that are made with Indigenous peoples. When we look at the kinds of research that has been done in our communities, and most of us are certainly aware that this went on and even is going on and may even continue into the future, is in terms of the exploitation of Indigenous peoples for their worldviews, their knowledge, their creativity and skills. That there is, Indigenous peoples are marginalized in terms of them being the subjects and objects of research, depending on how you look at it. Then we find that Indigenous peoples' contributions are not considered usually in the research analysis, the conclusions, or in the problem solving that goes with them. In fact, Indigenous peoples are often problematized and pathologized, especially when we think about the kinds of evidence that has been raised today about what we find as evidence of learning today is how many people go to high school, how many don't go to high school, how many dropped out, what the number is of dropouts, how many people are living in single-parent homes, how many people are in jail, how many people go back to jail, and so on. So what you're seeing in that kind of evidence, of the kinds of evidence that is kept on Indigenous people, we see that it is always in terms of us being deficient, dependent, and that those always are building upon us being the problem, our culture being a problem, where we live is a problem, and so on. And I think it was back, I remember the Merriam report and also the Hawthorne report in the United States both held those particular kinds of things. Language is a problem, community is a problem, our parenting skills were a problem, and so on. And those are then become the way in which evidence is then viewed. So we don't get really a good sense of what our people are, because basically the kinds of things that are being collected in terms of data are reflective of this, of Indigenous peoples who are living within this wounded space. Now, within the researchers that come into our communities, they are assumed the domain of the academic researchers, that this is their property, they're coming in, they're doing the study, and so it confers in them, in the research process, a privilege and power over in terms of deciding what the question will be, deciding the method, defining the style and its analysis, as well as where it's presented, how it's presented, and so on. And so it continues to build a very intrusive approach to data collection in our communities. And in so doing, it also ignores the whole, in other words, if we were to say, why is it that some people are not graduating from high school in this community? Would you look at the rate of or their employment ability, or their aspirations, or their connections? And this morning, Sydney Brown did a wonderful presentation that showed us how, if you are sort of building upon where you are in your thinking, you get a sort of a matrix of whether you are very strong traditional holder or whether you are very modern. So there's very different kinds of thinking that goes with that. I think that I was part of a group called the American Institutes for Research. I was part of that one too. The IDRC, the International Development Research Center in Canada. And we went to some countries, and we went to Guatemala, and we were watching and I was talking to people who were doing research with indigenous peoples on medicines. And they showed me, they went through one place and they said, oh, this machine was 800 million, we got that money from Japan, and here's another one that's a $50 million, this machine, takes and makes the oils out of the plants and so on. That's another $50 million kind of thing. And we went through this labs, and by the time we got to the end, I said, well, and what do you do? How do you get this knowledge? And they said, well, we go to, it's called wives' knowledge. They didn't even call it indigenous people's knowledge, wives' knowledge. And they go to the women and they ask them, rather than having to do these individual trials of taking each piece of plant and going out and saying, well, I wonder what this does, and go and do, all kinds of expensive trials, they go to the women and they ask them and they say, oh yeah, I use that for, my leg, I use it for my head, I use it for my, organs, I use it for, this and that, and fevers and so on. And so they take these plants and then they use it for those various purposes. They come up with these things. Then they say, Eureka, and I said, so what did you give back to the community? Did they get paid for this, for their knowledge? No, we didn't give them any pay. So, well, what are you giving back? And they said, well, we give them a journal. We write this all up and we give them a journal. And they get to buy this stuff as well. In the end, as you and I all are doing, we buy all those little essences and all that stuff, because that's what is coming from these particular kinds of things. And this is the sort of thing that I'm trying to raise the importance of the fact that research is necessarily political. It is about power relations. It is about the decisions that are being made about whose knowledge and how knowledge is used, as well as how knowledge goes back to communities and how knowledge is funded and so on. All those are very political kinds of things. There's also been that the ethics of doing the research is very much insufficiently explored, and even less explored has been as we come and we look to indigenous peoples around the globe, that we have very different communities and places and protocols and cultures and so on, and yet we have not explored among those peoples about the kinds of ethics that need to be undertaken in those particular areas. And it's good to hear about the people here who are beginning to bring those things forward, because I think that has to be a very important dialogue, and that we need to move to a more democratic kind of research. Now, I don't know what your word democratic imbues with your thinking today, but I'm thinking more in terms of ethical, not Obama versus Clinton. But anyway, in Canada, we've been working on these notions of ethics, and there's been a lot of dialogue among peoples and various organizations. Canadian Institutes for Health Research has been one that has put forward a document that has been well written by a colleague and friend, and also a student of mine, Willie Ermine. And Willie and Raven Sinclair have put together a document that talks about the ethical space that is between the discussion from First Nations and those in the Western world, and to begin to look at those particular kinds of a binary sort of kind of thing, and the opposition that they create, but recognizing that what is in the center, what comes together, people coming together to have a discussion where they are principled. Decision-making needs to go on in that space about what is taken up and what is not, and what is preserved and what is protected, and how that should happen. Some of the transforming content